and how how you would rate their behaviour on each day. And what you'll often find is you'll start to find characteristic patterns in your particular child with certain foods. So that can be quite useful too. As we said, other things to avoid. We said sugar is a definite one to avoid. Yellows and reds, as we said, the colourings, they're the ones that seem to affect the brain the most. Salicylates, aspirin, lots of fruits and perfumes. For example, apples, one of the highest fruits in salicylates. So a lot of us think, well, I'll give my kid apple juice because they can't have Coca-Cola, or I'll get them to eat lots and lots of fruit. You've got to almost avoid salicylates. They can be quite dangerous. That's why some of the asthma foods as well, the asthma medications, they've got salicylates in them, so that's the reaction there. Perfume. Some parents notice that you take your kid into a certain lady's house and the kid will be really struggling that particular session. MSG we mentioned before. Sulfites. This is often in a lot of your meats. Your hams, preserved meats are quite high in sulfites. Nitrites and nitrates. Sulfites is more your fruits, your dried fruits, things like that. Your nitrates and nitrates are more your meats. Food allergies, especially if you're looking at someone who's really getting towards more of an autistic spectrum, then it's really important to look at food allergies. They can really be suppressing the kid's nervous system. So some of the things that they recommend that your kids do eat is a high protein diet. Because as we'll see, amino acids are really good for kids' nervous systems. So these kids seem to do best on the zone diet. Have you ever heard of the zone diet? It's a good book to get your hands on. It's basically a high protein diet that was pretty trendy. Just before the high GI trend came in, there was the zone diet, which is more of a high protein diet. And then obviously the low GI sort of diet is good as well. What about supplements? What are things that we can add into our diet to try and improve the nervous system and the brain function? Essential fatty acids improve the nervous system and the brain function. Essential fatty acids are very well respected. Your omega-3 fish oil. So either supplementing with their tablet form or otherwise deep sea fish. Your salmons and tunas and mackerels and herrings, those sorts of things. The colder the water the fish lives in, apparently the higher the levels of the omega-3s. So even olive oil, has got some omega-3s in it. So, if you're making salad dressings, try to make them with an olive oil base. Minerals, magnesium, we know is a natural relaxant, so it's good for your whole nervous system. Most people associate it with relaxing muscles, but the reason it relaxes muscles is because it relaxes the nervous system. Chromium is very good for breaking down sugar. So if you have trouble with sugars, like diabetics, or every diabetic should be taking chromium, and most ADHD people should probably take chromium too, to try and help them break down the sugars that are getting into their system. And selenium is a very strong antioxidant. So antioxidants are very, very vital with these kids too, because it's like they seem to be breaking down certain chemicals in their brain perhaps more quickly than they should. So the more antioxidants you have, the more that these are being regenerated. Pycnogenol is grapeseed extract or pine bark extract. It's another very powerful antioxidant. So that can be used. It's actually patented as a treatment for ADHD. So it's probably a good one to look into. Herbs, valerian and St John's wort, just sort of natural herbal kind of relaxant sort of effect. So they can be quite useful, particularly if you're talking about hyperactive or impulsive behaviours. Bedtime, something like that is a good time to get these kids into valerian, and then perhaps during the day with some St John's wort perhaps. And then amino acids. Basically all of those chemicals that we were talking about inside your brain, they're produced from amino acids, which are the building blocks of proteins. So there are some that you can use to try and play around with the levels of the neurotransmitters in your brain. So D and L phenylalanine, there's two types. There's D amino acids and there's L amino acids. Most of the body works with L's, but D phenylalanine is a really good concentration amino acid. It helps your brain to concentrate and to focus. Tyrosine is a good natural sort of antidepressant, so it's a good calmative effect. And then glutamine it plays around with some of the other chemicals which helps people to focus and concentrate. And tryptophan, most of us know, like a warm milk with supper. It's a good calmative, good relaxant to the general nervous system. This is probably something you need to research a bit. Don't just sort of go out and buy these and shovel them in any proportions, because you need to be taking them in the right dosages. You need to be taking these on an empty stomach, because if you put them in with food, your body will just use them as protein. If you put them in as an empty stomach, then your body will tend to somehow put them straight into your nervous system. And the other amino acids, if some people say, well, I get this thing that's got all of the amino acids, some of them will actually suppress what those ones do, and they'll play with what those do. So you need to become a little bit of an expert in terms of amino acids, in terms of picking the ones that you need. Probably, if you wanted to start somewhere, probably tyrosine is the antidepressant, maybe phenylalanine. And tryptophan, you can't get it. It's a prescription drug, basically. So you have to try and get that in natural form. So a glass of milk, turkey, some fruits have tryptophan as well. What about chiropractic? How does chiropractic link into someone's brain working? Most people think of chiropractic just in terms of sore necks, bad backs, headaches, skeletal pains, muscular pains. But chiropractic throughout its whole history has always worked in psychological areas. In fact, back in the 20s and 30s, there was 2 psychiatric hospitals which were basically chiropractic hospitals, and they literally dealt with every psychiatric problem basically using chiropractic, and got quite stunning results. So we know from the research that's out that in terms of ADHD specifically, there's been some research done. Improvements in verbal output, reading and comprehension, attitude and self-esteem, coordination and emotional maturity. So it's almost like it does work on some of the things that will improve a kid's scholastic performance. And most parents comment on, it's amazing how often parents will come in and bring their children in, and they'll say, I know he needs his adjustment because he's starting to misbehave, he's getting tense, he's getting irritable, he's not sleeping too well. So parents often associate behavioural changes with when their child's needing an adjustment. And improved EEG, there was some very small research study done where they literally showed changes in those brainwave patterns before and after adjustments. So we know that literally when we're working on people's spines with chiropractic, it's not just about stretching ligaments and releasing muscles and getting joints moving. It's more about tapping into your central nervous system, which is where this problem's occurring in terms of ADHD. In fact, we know that when we talk about dopamines and those endorphins, those chemicals that are supposed to be in there, they're actually quite concentrated in your spinal cord as much as in your brain. So when you're getting your spine worked on, even through massage work perhaps, or whether it's through more specific chiropractic work, you're literally tapping into some of those chemical reactions and improving the way that some of those chemicals are getting up to your child's brain. So what it's about doing is getting the movement in your spinal system, which then gets more information, more chemicals travelling up through your central nervous system, which is better for these kids because they're having trouble with those levels. And we're trying to get rid of some of the irritation, some of the noise, that's in your central nervous system. People always comment on how they sleep better after an adjustment. They feel more relaxed. They seem to cope with stressful situations better. This has been shown through research. So we know that if we're calming down your nervous system, that's good for someone who's impulsive or hyperactive or even inattentive. It'll help them to focus in on their environment. And as we said, improved brain function. There's been research done. They've looked at anxiety levels, depression levels, state of well-being. They've looked at different chemicals even. And we know that when you get chiropractic adjustment, it does improve some of these aspects. So it can be. In fact, if you were to say to me, what should I start with? What's the one natural thing I should try first? Being biased, I would probably say, get your kid adjusted first, and then what we'll do is we'll layer in anything else that you kind of need on top of that. This is that study where it was done with an EEG. On the left you can see the classic ADHD patterns. The brain is doing what the kid's probably doing. And then straight after the adjustment you can see literally those prefrontal spikes have disappeared. What we know with kids with EEG is that there's alpha, beta, theta and gamma frequencies in your brain, and ADHD kids seem to get stuck in theta, which is is when you're daydreaming. You know, if you're daydreaming, your brain does this, it goes up and down. Whereas if you're in alpha mode, which is